Big time fight coming up this weekend in the lightweight division. We have Russia's Damir Ismagulov taking on Brazil's The Turn, Rafael Alves. And Matt, well, Rafael Alves' nickname sounds like some show that you'd find on Netflix. This guy can definitely bring it in the octagon. We're expecting his debut to be a little bit of a short notice affair down at featherweight, taking on Pat Sabatini. And Matt, we've seen some bad weight cuts, and listen, we've got another fighter on this card that recently tried to set a little bit of a record in her own record, Norma Dumont, but for Rafael Alves, weighed in at 157.5 for a fight at featherweight. We talked about it in the original breakdown. This guy used to fight at lightweight. His fighter and contender series to come into the UFC, that was at featherweight. Weight could be an issue because he's a heavily muscled guy at 155, very explosive striker, very unorthodox striker, and a really tricky grappler as well for Rafael Alves. The things that you like, he's coming out of MMA Masters. We've seen good fighters there, less Mike Perry, but more Miguel Baeza, Danny Chavez, Colby Covington.
Jacare?
No, not Jacare. But we have seen some really good fighters out of MMA Masters recently. And for Alves, again, a champion on the regional scene. He was with Titan FC. He was on an episode of Dana White's Looking for a Fight. He kind of gets the call, and in the episode, Dana goes, you know, I don't normally sign a guy that's 30 or around 30, and I don't normally sign a guy with this much experience, but we'll give him a go. We'll put him on the show. And he's had long layoffs and breaks throughout his career. So his third to last fight, 2 years, 10 months ago against Babit Nazarov. Really good win there. Then he takes off quite a bit of time. 2 years ago was his fight against Felipe Douglas. And then after that, 8 months and a week ago over Alejandro Flores. You like what you see out of Alves on the regional scene?
I do, because at face value, there's a lot to like from Rafael Alves. She's got decent jiu-jitsu. I'm going to get more into that in a second, though. And his striking's not bad for a guy who does have a decent ground game. The few things that I really dislike about Alves are, well, A, the cardio, and the fact that, you know what's not a great stat? Winning 7 fights by submission is a great thing to have. You know what's not great to pair with all those wins by submission? 6 losses by submission as well. And for Alves, he is really one of those kill or be killed fighters. And I don't say that in a way that, oh, he's going to go out there and get knocked out just by getting into these wild exchanges. He's going to fight until the point of exhaustion. Now, the issue is that that point of exhaustion for him will get him submitted. Of course, Rodolfo Vieira, I think we've kind of been famously kicked from his bandwagon, but he's one of those guys who, if he is 100% clear of mind in a jiu-jitsu setting, let's say, where there is no ground and pound, and he won't get extremely tired, he's probably not going to get tapped out by most MMA fighters. I feel very comfortable saying that. But once you add in the hits to the head, once you add in the wrestling and just the overall cardio involved in MMA, that's when you can see sort of cracks and even grapplers like Rodolfo Vieira's armor. With Rafael Alves, he is great on the ground, but I do really concern when he gets into those long grappling exchanges with his opponents. Yes, he might win them in that first round, and he might win a few in the second, but as that fight progresses, I'm always going to worry about a fighter like him in that third round.
Well, his opponent, Damir Ismagulov, is somebody that we haven't seen in some time, and this is a guy that, listen, when Fight Night Picks began 2018, I was watching the M1 Globals, I was watching ACB, I was really trying to get the dirt and the tape on some of these champions from outside of the major organizations in North America to really get a little well-rounded. Damir Ismagulov was a guy that really popped up on my radar, and Kazakhstan has seen their fair share of fighters in the UFC even recently. Shavkat Rakhmonov, you think Maria Agapova, and so on and so forth. But with Damir Ismagulov, former M1 Global Champ, he's a master of sport in Army hand-to-hand combat. You don't see that very often. And you look at the way that this guy fights. Plenty of finishes out of his overall 12 of 22 by knockout. And you look at the way that he's won fights in the UFC. And I think this is a really telling stat because you look at the first fight, Alex Gorgies, okay, he was a little early, and we haven't seen him in the UFC since. Joel Alvarez absolutely dominated him, and Thiago Moises, who, listen, Moises continued fighting. Now he has a big fight against Islam Makhachev coming up. But that fight against Moises was 1 year and 8 months ago. I'm going to read you off a couple of numbers, and you probably didn't think about this, but for the 3 fights that we've had Damir Ismagulov, so 3 fights, all to a decision, and the judges' scorecards were, there were 5 30-27s, 3 30-26s, 1 30-25 out of all of his fights. He's absolutely dominated the competition. Very, very heavy. He's a great striker. I love everything I've seen out of Damir Ismagulov, and he's one of those guys, dark horse in the division. It's just a shame that we haven't seen him compete in so long.
I couldn't agree more, because when I think about guys like Damir Ismagulov and guys like Thiago Moises, those are guys outside the top 15, and there's other fighters out there too, but there's guys outside the top 15 who just can't get fights with guys inside outside the top 15, or even guys with decent names. And it's just unfortunate because anyone who has a name isn't going to want to give some young up-and-comer the opportunity to really make their own name off of the legacy, if you will, of that fighter. But for Damir, if you beat a guy like Thiago Moises, you should only be like, okay, there's only top 20 guys and top 15 guys in your future. So it is really unfortunate that we haven't been able to see him compete for 20 months, but this is a great tune-up fight for him. And it's unfortunate to say that, but you look at Alves, yes, he belongs to 155. I do think the whole 145 experiment just kind of dumb because it was basically like when Rogerio Bontorin fought Matt Schnell. If Matt Schnell had weighed in at 125 and then Bontorin had showed up at like 137, then that fight would have been ridiculous. And that's basically what Alves did. I think this is one of those fights where it's like, hey, you messed up in your last one. We're going to give you a stylistic nightmare. Because for Alves, I think he can hang on the feet with Damir for a little bit of this fight. And I think he can hang with some of the wrestling and some of the grappling exchanges. But my problem is that when you're fighting a guy who can fight not only with a high work rate, but just make you work during the fight, I just think it's a really bad matchup for Alves at the end of the day.
We'll have to see how it plays out. And again, the whole cardio thing, you know, if you want to go back and have a little bit of fun, go back and watch our video, Christos Iago, Sean Soriano. Now, if you do look into the comments section, one of Christos' coaches hopped in there and said, boys, he doesn't have to invest in a Peloton. His third round cardio is not all that great, but he likes to finish guys quick. And hey, credit where credit's due. Great win by Iagos. You guys trained him the right way.
That was awesome.
What the hell do these guys on the internet know? But if you look at it for Alves, he has tended to tire in his fights, and there's certain points where he either gets caught or he gets guys in really good defensive submissions. He can get them in, you know, it could be a Darce, it could be a guillotine, whatever it is. Alves is a master of it. Almost think like an Andrea Muniz in a little bit of a way. Now, I don't know if he's
settled down a lot, though.
I don't know if he's going to be breaking arms. The other thing that he does, really, really creative striker. We've got Chris Barnett making his UFC debut this week as well. Insane heavyweight with some of the things that he does, but I remember if you watch Alves' fight on Dana White's Contender Series, it's one of those things, I bet you Paul Felder would complain about it. He's the type to do like flips before the fight. Buddy, you're not Carl Edwards. Don't do the flips. You're just expending that tank even more, but I digress. If we have a look at the odds, Matt, Damir Ismagulov, the biggest favorite on the card, open to minus 500. He's minus 581 right now. For Alves, open to plus 335. He's now plus 414. And if we have a look at the total Tapology votes, 968 votes. 94% Ismagulov, 82% by decision. The odds heavily favor Ismagulov, last point for me. And listen, the fans have him on Tapology. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there in the comments section that will as well. And please let us know who you're picking in this one. I like Ismagulov. The only thing that worries me is Alves is a master defensive submission. And he's a really, really explosive striker. But if you can withstand the first round, it's Ismagulov's fight.
That's the problem. When you are that really explosive striker, there is a give and take with having all that power. And normally the takeaway is having a poor gas tank. And I know we fed this horse quite a bit with Alves, but it is such a big part of his game that, yes, he brings that big storm in the first round. But if you can weather it, and Ismagulov, he can go to the wrestling. He can outstrike Alves, especially from the outside. I just think stylistically, everything is going to be a really hard matchup for Alves. Now, with the time off, maybe it will take about a round for Damir to kind of get his feet under him and look like the Damir Ismagulov of old, but I do think stylistically this is a really hard one for Rafael Alves.
Both of us going with Kazakhstan's Damir Ismagulov to get the win. Can't wait for the fight. Lightweight is absolutely on fire with the new champ, Charles Oliveira, at the top. We got a great card coming up this weekend. Rob Font taking on Cody Garbrandt in the main event. You're not going to want to miss it, so keep it locked in with Fight Night picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.